Hello, I'm TOEFL Guy, but you can all call me Guy. This is the second episode of the speaking block. In the previous episode, we saw some general information about the TOEFL oral test, focusing on the first section. We saw the general organization of the test and the types of questions they use. We also talked about strategies to get the best result in the first section of the TOEFL speaking test. If you haven't watched it yet, check out the playlist. In this episode, we'll see an example of an answer and talk about strategies to prepare for this part of the oral test. If you already have the book, on pages 82 to 86 you will find more detailed information, general tips for taking the oral test, and specific tips for the type of question used in the first section. Oh, haven't you got the book yet? Get it on Amazon. Click on the link in the description of this video. Let's begin.
Hey, did you manage to record that answer? Didn't you? Doesn't matter. If you didn't, you can do it now and come back to watch the episode, or you can always do it later. We talked about answering this question. People have different preferences when it comes to studying for an exam. Do you prefer to study in a group or to study alone to prepare for exams? Give details and examples. We talked about having organization as a reason to study in a group, remember? So let's see how we do this. Think of details about having organization. For example, you will have a set time to meet. You will not be able to stop studying while the meeting is going on, and you will have the encouragement of colleagues. Now think of examples to show the importance of these details. Like, schedule. When I study alone, I keep leaving it for later and end up not studying. It's hard to stick to a set schedule because I can study whenever I want. Concentration. I get very distracted when I study alone. I stop studying to do other things and end up leaving it for the next day. Encouragement. It's really boring when I study alone, so I get lazy and I always stop studying. In the exam, we only have 15 seconds to prepare the answer. Doesn't seem like much, right? But actually, if you count the time on the clock, you'll see that you can do it easily once you're used to it. That's why you have to practice. The good thing is that the answer is very short, only 45 seconds. If you organize your ideas with details and examples, it's not that difficult to speak 45 seconds. We will practice these two steps a lot. The organization of ideas and speech. And you will get better and better at this. Let's try to build the answer. So there you go. I prefer to study in a group when I'm going to take an exam, because I can organize myself better. To begin with, group study has a set schedule, and it is regular. When I study alone, I keep putting it off, and sometimes I don't even study. When I study in a group, it also helps me to stay focused. When I'm studying alone, I get distracted easily, and I end up doing other things, and it's hard to go back to study. The most important thing is that when I study in a group, my colleagues help me. I find it very boring to study alone, and I end up getting lost and not knowing what to study.
Did you understand how this first section of the speaking test is? Now that we have a good idea of what we need to do, let's see how we prepare to do it in English. First, let's think about the vocabulary we need. Of course, some of it will depend on the question, but there is some that is common to this type of question and can always be used. We're going to talk about it now. How do we know which words are used in responses in general? It's actually very simple. We just need to analyze the question and the types of answers we can give. Let's analyze the wording of the question. People have different preferences when it comes to studying for an exam. Do you prefer to study in a group or to study alone to prepare for exams? Give details and examples. You can see that the statement has three parts. The first part is the context, which is usually used just to get into the mood of the question and most of the time has no importance for the question or the answer. People have different preferences when it comes to studying for an exam. The second part is the question, do you prefer to study in a group or to study alone to prepare for exams? That part is really important because that's what we have to answer, and we can predict the vocabulary that we can use to build our answer. Notice how the question is enough. You don't need the first part to understand the question. That's why we say that, in this type of question, the context doesn't matter much. It's just to set the scene. The third part is instructions, give details and examples, and it is also important because we need to follow all the instructions. Complying with all instructions applies to all questions in the oral and written test as well. People here consider this one of the golden rules of the proficiency exam. Not only in the TOEFL, but in any exam, we believe that the best path is to follow exactly what the question is asking. You will notice, during the entire course, that we follow all the instructions in the questions very strictly. Give to Caesar what belongs to Caesar. In our case, give the question exactly what the question is asking for. This is very simple, but cannot be emphasized enough. It's like this: if they ask for an opinion, give an opinion. If they ask for an example, give an example. If they ask for an argument. I think you got that, right?
Let's start with the analysis of the question. Do you prefer to study in a group or to study alone to prepare for exams? The question asks for preference, so we already know that we need vocabulary and expressions to speak about preferences in English. It seems very simple. I can just say, I prefer. But what is the grammar of I prefer? We can say, I prefer to study, and I prefer studying. But we cannot say, I prefer study, or I prefer to studying. Of course, this example may seem very obvious, and you most likely already know that. But first, there are people who don't know it yet. Second, we are just getting started. If you consider the whole answer and alternative expressions, then it can get a little bit more complex. For example, if I don't want to use I prefer, what other expressions can I use? This is a question we always need to ask. What other expressions can I use? Because another golden rule of the proficiency exam is to avoid repeating words, both in the oral and in the written test. One of the things that examiners take into account when deciding what grade they will give you is your vocabulary. The technical terms for this are lexical resource and range of vocabulary. This has to do with being able to use the words best suited to the context and using synonyms to avoid repetition. In addition, and those who watched the first episode of the reading block may remember this, all reading and listening tests are constructed to avoid using the same words that appear in the written and recorded material in the questions and alternative answers. The name of this is paraphrase, saying the same thing using different words. So, we need to know more than one way to talk about the subjects that appear in the exam. In our case now, preference. For example, a more sophisticated way of saying, I prefer, is saying, I would rather. This is a common expression among native English speakers. 9,195 examples of the use of would rather appear in the corpus, and 1,167 of these examples are in the oral category, but the expression may be unfamiliar to many candidates taking the test. If we use, I would rather study alone, first, it is a more complex form of the language and will attract the examiner's attention. Second, we can use I prefer elsewhere in the answer, such as in the conclusion, and not have to repeat the word. How about you build an answer in English to this question and then look for words and expressions to replace the ones you used in your answer? The teachers here will do the same, and we can discuss what we found in the next episode.
This was the second episode of the speaking block. We built an example of answer to an independent question and discussed how to prepare to answer these questions in English. We saw that the statements of these questions can be divided into three parts: context, question, and instructions. We saw that it is important to meet all the requirements of the questions, and that we can build a recyclable vocabulary to use in the answers. In the next episode, we'll start exploring the integrated questions on the speaking test. The first is fit and explain. On pages 85 and 86, 112 to 114, 116 to 118 of the book, you will find tips, samples, templates, and detailed explanations on the type of question we just discussed here. Don't forget to follow the general block to work on your pronunciation. To get the best score on the TOEFL exam, subscribe to the channel and watch this space. See you later.